Good morning, good day, and good evening. I'm as your host, Brody Robertson, and today, I don't know how to describe the project you're doing. Because most people, they use like, whatever, GNOME 48, whatever it is right now, KDE 6, and you're like, hey, what if we take KDE 1 and then make that a modern desktop? Welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's kind of reusing what's out there already, at the most basic of it.
So yeah, go on. Sorry, there's a really big delay. So if I cut you off, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. Go ahead.
I guess the best place we can start is just why. Why I think is the best place.
Well, I started using Linux back in the Red Hat 6 days. So this was before, Red Hat Enterprise Linux didn't even exist at the time. And KDE 1 was the desktop environment that was common back then.
Right.
And so I spent a lot of time on that. And so it's a bit nostalgia. And it's also a bit of a way to provide a lean and resource light desktop environment, which is funny because back then it was not considered to be light. It was pretty, I remember sitting on my laptop waiting for it to swap it out, and because I didn't have enough memory, but on today's computers, it just works.
Yeah, that's sort of the problem you have with, as you add more features, you're obviously going to have the software become heavier and heavier and heavier. But obviously, these aren't bad features, right? Like, maybe some of them are. I'm not going to say every one of them is good, but you're naturally going to use more resources as you have more stuff. But, having fancy graphical effects, all of this stuff, like, you don't really need it, do you?
No, and there's a lot of great things. Like, my daily driver is KDE Plasma 6. And if you compare it to like version 4, it's actually pretty well tuned nowadays. But there's a lot of, fluff, like a transparent taskbar, or all these, options in the settings that I never use, but somebody does because they're there.
Yeah, I think you pick KDE 4. 4 is a very interesting one to pick because that's, notoriously the very, very rough release.
Yes, it was painful. I left KDE at that time because it was so bad.
I think a lot of people did.
The Trinity Desktop was a great drop-in then, if you've heard of that.
Yes. And that's, I guess that sort of... that sort of links into that, because I saw one of the comments be like, hey, why don't you just go... and why are you building off of KDE 1? Why not KDE 3? It's like, well, yeah, but someone's already doing that.
They've done a pretty nice job. I used it for quite a few years, and they polished it really nicely. But it's still a pretty, heavy desktop environment even still.
I personally didn't start using KDE until Plasma 6. I've used a bit of Plasma 5, like towards, I think it was 5.27, so it was like right towards the end of that. I don't have this nostalgia for the older versions of KDE, or I didn't start using Linux until 5-6 years ago, something like that. So my experience is pretty much the design language that we use on the desktop really hasn't changed that much in the past 5 or so years. Like, things have been kind of polished, but there's not been any real, I guess, design revolution, I guess, is a good way to put it, right? Because if you go from the way a desktop used to look with KDE 1, the way that we design desktops, the way we design icons, the way we just designed just the structure of the applications is completely different. You can still wrap your head around what they were going for. There's still that core, I look at this, I can tell it's KDE. Same with GNOME. If you look at early GNOME, you can see this is... I can see how this becomes a modern version, but the way they go about it is very, very different.
You know, the needs of people change over time.
Mm-hmm.
I like to compare KDE 1 to modern Plasma, like jumping from Windows 2000 all the way up to, Windows 11.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a pretty good comparison there.
Right, because you can even if you go back further than that, if you look back at the early versions of macOS before OS X, you can see some of that design inspiration that follows on later, even though a lot of it's changed and it's completely different in the way you interact with it. You can see how things progressed over the years, and most projects don't go through a complete, I'm gonna entirely change what my target is going to be. There's obviously, with Windows, there was that brief period where they tried to do the whole mobile first thing. But besides that weird part, you can see how Windows progressed. Same thing with these Linux desktops as well, which I think is, it's really cool to see, right? You see a desktop that's been around for, what? When did KDE start? Was it 98? Something like that?
Some of the code I have seen as early as 1997. I think some of it started earlier than then, but the dates in the files are earliest 1997.
Mm-hmm. Right, it might have been first full release that was 98 then. That's what might be what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, yeah, I think the version 1 was released somewhere around 1998,
Mm-hmm.
or one of the releases, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then I believe GNOME came... I want to say GNOME came the year after that, if I recall correctly.
I think so, yeah. And it's kind of funny to bring GNOME up because, I used GNOME 1 quite a bit back in the day too, and it's very different than what GNOME is nowadays.
Mm. Well, definitely in the way... Well, there's actually there's a article from a very long time GNOME developer. I think it was from like 2003. And even though the desktop has been greatly simplified since then, and a lot of the toggles that used to be there, a lot of the theming stuff that used to be there is either hidden away or completely gone. People early on, from what I can tell, this was the direction they wanted to take things. They just didn't really know how far they wanted to take it. And I guess also the needs of people back in the early 2000s, back in the late 90s, was definitely very different, right? Because people using Linux back then, for the most part, especially if we're talking before Ubuntu in 2004, most people using Linux at that point are very, very technical people, right? Especially if you go, like, even before some of the early distros, if you were using Linux before something like Slackware came along, you are a very, very technical user. Even by the late 90s, getting Linux to work then was a very different experience than what it is now. Nowadays, for the most part, unless you have some weird esoteric hardware you're trying to install on like an Apple computer, for the most part, things just work.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how far we've come. I can remember having an old ThinkPad and having to write, the x86 config file out by hand because that's how things were done back then. I think, one of the biggest drivers in the changes over the years, when Linux first came out, is replacing or competing with DOS and Windows. So, everything was done on a keyboard. And then, as things like KDE came around, we went to, using keyboard and mouse. And as you progressed on to newer ones, it was more, point and click. And nowadays, with newer GNOME and newer KDE versions, it's touchscreen. And so I think that design language has followed that pretty closely over the years.
I do think, I don't know, I can do a UX discussion about GNOME for a very long time because there's a lot of design changes they've made which I don't really think make sense on the desktop. I am not a fan. I've noticed them popping up in some KDE applications as well. I'm not a fan of hamburger menus. I think they are just vastly inferior way to interact with a menu than just having a menu bar. I know some developers are going to get very angry about that like they always do. I don't like them. I don't think they work on a phone either. I think there are better ways to do things there as well. Just having a pop-out list I think is just more convenient. But overall, I can see what you mean there, where especially early on, right? a lot of people designing KDE were the developers. And that's sort of a problem you have with a lot of applications where the developers are going to develop it in a way that makes sense for someone very technical or makes sense for them. If you don't have a outside guiding hand, it can be very easy to not design things specifically around the way you use something. Because you might, especially if you're using something all the time, you're going to know the pitfalls. You're going to know if I click this thing in this way, something weird's going to happen. You're going to know where the buttons are laid, out, even if they're laid out in a real weird way that doesn't make any sense. So you kind of need someone outside the developer to say, hey, do things in a sensible way. Here's a design guideline. How about we follow this?
I think that's kind of interesting because even when I sit and write an application, I'm thinking about how I'm going to use it personally. So I'm designing it very specifically tailored to my needs without much thought, for anything else. But I'd like to make a note on GNOME because I have used it recently, sparingly. I think the biggest problem there was something simple, even for somebody more technical like me, trying to figure out where the menu was. Something as simple as trying to save or open a file in the text editor was really difficult. There's no contrast in the default theming. And I don't see even how a developer or a UI designer could miss that, quite frankly. But it works for a lot of people because it's pretty popular. So it must be fine at some point.
The thing about being popular, it's the default right now. And that's sort of why I'm interested to see what happens with did you see about Fedora adopting KDE as a official edition? So it's going to be both GNOME and KDE side by side.
I did see that, and I actually ran the Fedora KDE spin for quite some time to get kind of a jump on the Plasma 6 bandwagon, and it works quite well. So I'm happy to see that they are adopting that as an official spin. I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to see how the popularity of GNOME will go, because it's sort of we're sort of repeating history now, because it started off with all of these desktops, all of these distros having KDE, and then GNOME came along, they adopted GNOME, and then over time, a lot of them ended up dropping KDE, go GNOME only, and now it's coming back once again to have both these options. And I get why KDE was dropped by a lot of them early on, like especially in the early days. There were a lot of licensing concerns with KDE, with specifically with the Qt framework, and that's, from my understanding, a big reason why GNOME came along, why GNOME got popular to begin with, because there are a lot of people concerned, well, what happens if they pull the license? What happens if they decide to not let this keep being open source? And I get it, right? I do get it.
Yeah, so there was a pretty big to-do back in the day, because of the licensing. And Qt1 was under a source available license. And, so GNOME came about at that time. But I do want to mention, because I see this come up a lot, nowadays there's I think it's called the KDE Free Qt Foundation or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And there's been a licensing agreement of some kind between whatever owner of Qt, starting with Trolltech, which was the original authors, up until now, when it's the Qt group that guarantees that Qt will always have an open source component. So, those fears have long been squelched. But that's actually a important note because, my fork of KDE 1, we've ported it to Qt2 because of licensing issues with Qt1. I can't fix Qt1.
Right.
Qt2 is GPL-v2, so we can actually fix it, maintain it, continue to work with it.
I was going to ask you about that, because that seemed like a weird random change to make. I didn't even consider the fact that the license would have been an issue.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. Licensing. Modern Qt is not an option because it is mostly GPL v3, and that's not backwards compatible with v2.
Right.
But some of the other reasons are Qt2 has a lot of fixes. Something simple we take for granted, like the scroll wheel on your mouse,
Mhm.
doesn't work in anything written for Qt1, but
Mhm.
support for that's in Qt2. Other things probably don't, not as important on the user's end, but your support for Unicode characters so you can actually see everybody's language properly. That
Mhm.
was improved.
Did we lose him? Hello? Did we disconnect? Did I disconnect? Discord's been having these issues lately. Let me have a look. Who disconnected? It says I'm connected. Oh, wait, maybe I did disconnect. Uh, Hello?
Can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay.
I've been having issues lately with things just disconnecting. Okay,
Yeah.
that's
Could be
fine.
my internet too.
No, I think Discord on my side said 5,000 milliseconds ping, so I don't know. Anyway, you're talking about going to Qt2 because it offers some fixes for things that didn't exist in Qt1.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how much cut out there, but beyond the licensing issue, I think we covered the scroll wheel issue.
Scroll and
And
Unicode. Unicode was the last thing I heard.
okay, yeah, that's pretty much where I stopped there.
Okay, okay. Um, so what is it actually like? Okay, first, here's where we go. So you've said this work is based upon prior work that has been done. I did talk about this in the video, but I don't know if there was anything I missed there or anything I got a little bit wrong there. So what work is this based upon?
So my fork is actually based on one of the KDE developers, or he participates in KDE nowadays.
Mhm,
Nice guy, Helio Castro, I
mhm,
believe is his online username.
mhm,
Back around 2016 or thereabouts, I'm not sure how I stumbled across it, but he did some work to get KDE1 and Qt1 running on modern Linux.
mhm,
And I thought that was cool. So I spent some time to compile it, and it wasn't, perfect, but I got it running. I think I was running Debian 8 at the time, actually. And I
mhm,
thought, this is cool. And I forget at some point, I kind of thought, well, it'd be cool to kind of keep this alive.
mhm,
And that's how it all started. But yeah, I owe a lot to his initial work because he got rid of the old Auto Tools build system, went to CMake, which uh, that has its own problems, but it works.
mhm, mhm.
And he fixed a lot of bugs necessary to get it to compile. So he did a lot of great work. I have talked with him every now and again about it too.
Mhm.
So he's pretty cool stuff he did.
What's you mentioned CMake there. What don't you like about CMake?
It's difficult to maintain. Uh,
Okay.
and somebody who works with it every day, which KDE, I believe the main project uses CMake nowadays.
Mhm,
So they're working with it every single day. It probably works great, but there are some old style CMake scripts, for lack of a better term, that were used in this, and it makes maintaining it difficult since I don't use CMake every day, and so I spend a lot of time fixing their breakages there, which is why we're moving it to Mason because I use that all the time, and it's easy to work with.
So it's just you don't have the knowledge and the skills. You just don't have the experience using CMake, pretty much.
Yeah, it's mostly matter preference. The build system works fine.
Mhm.
They've made a lot of changes in newer versions, but I just don't have any real personal desire to go to that.
Fair enough. Look, if you know it, you might as well use the thing you know rather than trying to. You're trying to you're trying to port KDE1 to be something that works as a modern desktop, focusing on doing that rather than spending however many hours you need to maintain the build system. I think is a much better use of your time.
Yeah, that's the idea. Is the build system should be there to help you and not be a problem. And
Hmm.
Mason has been. We ported Osiris, which is the fork of Qt2, to Mason,
Hmm.
and it's just so much easier to use. It's easy to troubleshoot, and it speeds up the building process as well.
Hmm. Well, on that note of a fork of Qt2, what is it about Qt2 that I'm sure there's a lot of things that Qt2 doesn't have that you would kind of want, but at the baseline when you decided to fork it, what was it that you realized that you needed to fix?
Well, there were some long-standing bugs. That work started back in 2016 as well.
Okay.
I had a guy help me get running, just running, and decided to take it further from there. But there are some odd bugs that you come across in software, like the clipboard. It doesn't really work altogether that great.
Okay.
And one of the things I like to do is I have a retro computer collection. I like my old stuff. And so I have old computers I can run those old Linux distributions on. So I went back and grabbed an old copy of Mandrake,
hmm
which came originally with KDE 2, which is how you would have gotten Qt2 back then. And the clipboard functionality was still a problem back then. So that's not a new bug. And I spent a bunch of time trying to troubleshoot that. And clipboards with X11 is always been a problem. And because we're going to Wayland, there's no real point fixing that because we'll have to rewrite that anyways.
hmm
Uh, there's some other odd bugs with old X11 software you don't think about. One of the things kind of perplexed me for a minute was you would start a program that uses Osiris and it would be washed out on your window for no good reason. And
Okay.
turns out there's this extension to X called Composite that changes the color space that's used, and those old ones don't know about it.
Uh-huh.
So that's another thing needs to be fixed. There's workarounds, but uh, they're just temporary.
hmm
As far as things I'd like to add, obviously planning to port to Wayland. So we need to make it work as a Wayland client. And I also want to add Markdown support. You can write widgets that use rich text or HTML, but I want them to be able to use Markdown because everybody uses Markdown nowadays.
hmm So, okay. So, wait, I had something on my mind. It just vanished from my mind. It's gonna be one of these days. Right. So, when you're trying to work out how to do anything with this like old version of Qt, is the documentation still easily available? Do you have to like dig through the Wayback Machine to go find some stuff? Like what what do you have that you can actually work from here?
One of the things I like about Qt, and this starts at Qt version 1 and goes all the way up to version 6,
Mhm,
is the documentation is really good. I would
mhm.
say second to none. Yeah, it's true. Like I said, of Qt1 and Qt2, when you get the source tarball, the documentation is all there as HTML files. So all the original documentation is still with it.
Okay, that makes it a lot
And
easier.
there's occasionally really odd comments in the code, like you'll see a to do fix later, or things like that in the source code from people who were Trolltech employees at the time, and some of those have been fixed since then, actually.
I'm not surprised at all, considering the stuff that people see in like leaked proprietary code. Whenever you see like a video game where their code is leaked, and you just see just absolutely delusional comments. I have Look, every open source project's going to be like this. To be fair, a lot of open source projects have no comments. So if you have to dos fix this later, that's better than most things have.
Yeah, and, I like to commenting code's good, and I like to leave some unhinged comments here and there as Easter eggs if somebody looks later. But to do as a comment is a really good thing because you can grep through those source code files for to do, and you have your whole list ready there for you waiting. So that's not a bad thing to be doing that.
Actually, that's a really good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. Considering when Qt2 came out, do you know what they used as source control back then? Because that was like 6 years before Git.
Yeah, so I there's no source there's no like archives of the version control back then, but I would like to say they probably used CVS.
Hmm.
It's old enough they maybe used RCS. I really don't know either way, but those are some of the more popular things back then.
Mm-hmm. So you're basically just using whatever the source code has as to-dos as your sort of starting point, and then as you run across your own issues, then you deal with those to come. Because like some of those to-dos might also just be wrong. They might have put a to-do there, fixed it, and just left the to-do there.
Yeah, so one of the ways I overcome that actually is, I forked from the last release of Qt 2, which was
Mhm.
2.3.2.
Mhm.
But the source code archives contain all the previous versions.
Mhm.
And so I've imported all those into my Git tree, and so I can compare or, diff between different
Right.
versions to see what's happened.
Actually, that's a good point. Yeah. That is a really good point. So, what what is the state that you have QT2 in right now, and what is the state you have KDE1 in? Like, I know you've said you needed to port stuff over to QT2. Has that effort been mostly done? Where is that sort of at right now?
So as far as Osiris goes, I just did a release not that long ago. We're on version 2.4.3 now.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually to fix some minor security bugs that were caught when I was packaging it for Debian, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So there are packages available for Debian and Ubuntu distributions now, for 32-bit, 64-bit, and also ARM. It runs
Oh.
on ARM platforms too, surprisingly. And as far as the port to Osiris goes, that's been done actually.
Mm-hmm.
So KDE1 runs on Osiris. There are some uh, bugs to work out before it's really usable.
Mm-hmm.
Something annoying like when you click log out, it pops up a log out screen, except you can't click log out again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a bit of a
So
problem.
a little bit. You can still hit enter, but it's kind of counterintuitive.
Right.
Something basic like that you would expect to work. And I'm not sure where the bug came. It could have been in the port. It could have already been there,
Mm-hmm.
or it could have been introduced, unintentionally. Compilers have changed quite a lot, so it's hard to say where those come from.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, you could use KDE1 its current state. Well, I guess what are you calling it now? What's the fork you've called it?
I say Mida. I heard you on the video saying my DE, and quite frankly, I like that pronunciation
No,
better. It sounds great.
I wouldn't have guessed.
uh,
I would not have guessed the one you said.
yeah, that's probably following the Japanese pronunciation more closely, but I really like the thought of my DE because it's intended, to be somebody's desktop environment.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if you can see a screen share or not.
Yes, it will kind of mess with the overlay, but you can try to show me. I can set stuff up.
Okay. I have no idea if this will work, but
Should work.
see
Yeah.
if it shows up. Just, I don't know if you can see that or
Yep.
not.
Yep. That's fine.
So this is actually the current fork. I've got it running in a little XNest window, and you can see there's some bugs running under XNest, like the desktop numbers are gone. They were there earlier when I first started, but for some
Mm-hmm.
reason they're not there. But it's for the most part usable. Obviously, some application you're missing the icons on the desktop. They crashed at some point long
Mm-hmm.
ago. But the general rule, it's usable. Uh, there's weird things you see happen, like if you start Firefox in it,
Mm.
it will suddenly Firefox will extend beyond the available screen, like it will extend to infinity. It'll maximize to infinity, well
Mm-hmm.
beyond your borders. But yeah,
Oh.
it's usable.
Mm-hmm. Wait. It extends to what? What? Why would it do that?
Well, I don't know
Well,
exactly.
yeah,
It
that you
used
wouldn't
to
have the
work,
bug there.
and and at some point it stopped working. I don't know if it
Mm-hmm.
was a Firefox update or just an odd bug I happened to run into. But
Mm-hmm.
what it'll do is KDE1 isn't aware of multi-monitor, so it'll show up on both monitors. You can drag windows, but you could set a window squarely between both monitors, and it thinks you're on the same one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think something to do with that, Firefox somehow thinks that means the monitor extends indefinitely, so it will continue expanding off to one side until you close it.
Mhm.
And if you start Google Chrome, it used to work at some point too, but now it just occupies half of one screen and you can't change it. So
Okay, yeah, sure.
who knows what's happened? Little gremlins.
Well, that's actually a really good thing to bring up, the multi-monitor thing, because X11 and multi-monitor has always been like a real weird thing, and because original early X11, what is it, like 1984? Yeah, 1984 is the first release of X11. Multi-monitors were not a thing with at all at that point, and then basically what people take for granted the fact that X-Render exists. They really, really do. X-Render makes things very, very, very convenient. But still, at its core, the idea of multi-monitors is kind of like something glued on way after the fact, and it mostly works. Mostly.
Yeah, X11 has actually done its job quite well, for as old as it is. I mean, it's so many decades old. I'm still running it on a multi-monitor setup. Has its limitations, but everything we use in modern X11 is an extension tacked on top of a very old base. And you're right. Once XR and R came out, that really changed the game because before that they had, I believe, what was called Xinerama, and that was really painful to get working. So it's great that we have those tools nowadays. And, now that Wayland's here, those are kind of going by the wayside, but it still works.
It still works is about as good of a compliment as you can give it. So, with the Wayland stuff, where do you even begin to approach that problem? Because there are different ways that, like Cinnamon, for example, they are... I believe they're approaching the Wayland issue by building their applications to work generically on different compositor bases. So you can swap out the compositor it's using. Then you have something like GNOME with Mutter, where Mutter and the tooling above it is all like very tightly, grouped together. Then you have KDE, where you can swap out the compositor, but things are intended to be used with this specific one. So before we even get into the idea of whether it's going to be something like WL Roots based or Mer based or maybe Smithy based, if you want to do Rust stuff, I don't know, might be that thing you want to do. How do you consider approaching this problem?
That's kind of a hard one, actually. X11 is obviously deprecated at this point, but there's quite a few people using it still, and I haven't really decided yet, to be honest, but maintaining two code bases like that's kind of hard. So what'll most likely happen is we'll probably deprecate X11 support sooner rather than later. Qt2 has some support for multiple backends because back then you had either X11 or what was called DirectFB for embedded devices.
Right.
That's been reincarnated today as DirectFB2, which it doesn't support. But yeah, that's kind of a tough one because I know people are going to want to still keep using X11, but that's a legacy broken code base even as it sits. So the first place to start is Osiris. That's the most bottom layer of everything. We'll probably start with the 2.5 series, and that'll probably be Wayland only.
Okay.
If there's any fixes or security issues, we'll just backport them to 2.4 for those who want to use it. And then once my IDE is ported to Wayland, it's probably going to be Wayland only because we're going to have to rewrite so much code to make that work. It's just going to be difficult, for me and a couple other guys that work on it. There's just not enough time to go around to maintain both at the same time.
So would you consider having your own compositor for it? Would you want to build off of an existing compositor out there? How would you, or do you just not really know how you're going to approach that yet?
I've got a few ideas. but it's not set in stone yet. Probably kind of see when it comes to it, but most likely what will happen, KWM is the window manager and KDE1. Most likely that will be rewritten to be both the compositor and the window manager. So
Mhm.
probably write our own compositor.
Mhm. Okay, okay. I'm sure that's gonna be introducing its own fair share of challenges.
Yeah, I've never written a compositor, so that's going to be interesting.
Mhm.
That's kind of why, another reason why I plan to start with Osiris. So once Osiris can, use Wayland as a backend, any application using it besides a window manager should in theory work with Wayland. So that's a start, to learning how that all works and kind
Mhm.
of figure out what we need to do.
Mhm. Mhm. Right, so deal with the applications first. That's a much simpler problem, and then deal with the compositor once you've sort of got your head more wrapped around the way that Wayland works.
Pretty much. And as far as I know, that's how like XFCE is actually doing their port as well.
Yeah.
Looking through their roadmap, they did most of the applications first and then went, to the really nasty parts of it later.
Mhm. Yeah, they're coming along pretty well to the best of my knowledge. They've still got a lot of work, and that's sort of the state a lot of these old X11 desktops are in, where I know that Ubuntu wants to get rid of Xorg sometime in the next couple of years, so a lot of them are kind of scrambling to get things done. Budgie, I'm pretty sure is the furthest along. I don't think Budgie's got its full Wayland release done yet. But things like I didn't disconnect again, did I? Did I? Oh my god. What is happening today? Uh what? This is a great recording.
Seems to have.
Oh, we're back?
There you are.
What is happening today?
I don't know.
What was the last thing you heard?
Oh boy. I forget, to be honest.
Okay, I was talking about Ubuntu wanting to get rid of Xorg, so a lot of the desktops are kind of scrambling to get things ported over to Wayland. Budgie's the furthest along. XFCE, they're doing pretty good on their side. Cinnamon, I believe, has an experimental version. I don't know if Trinity's even trying. I got no idea about Trinity.
My understanding on Trinity, and this is mostly hearsay, reading the mailing lists, and one comment on Reddit. So
Best
to be
source.
taken with a grain of salt.
Mm.
My understanding is there is no current planned port of Wayland, but I could be wrong.
Mhm.
That'd be really, it's big enough for me, for them it'd be absolutely massive. My understanding, though, is they're trying to make it play better under X Wayland.
Right.
So you can still use it that way, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, that seems to be again, that's sort of the approach that like Cinnamon stuff's taking, where they are not doing their own compositor. They're relying on a compositor that already exists. So if they can at least get their application suite over to Wayland, even if it's just getting to X Wayland, but playing nicely with those Wayland protocols, you're pretty much most of the way there anyway.
So X Wayland actually is a pretty cool tool, and I test my DE and Osiris in it. It's literally an X server sitting on top of Wayland. So
Mhm.
for the most part, any application that ran on X before, you could still run in Wayland under X Wayland. You can run a whole window manager, but it's confined to one little square on the screen. It doesn't go to your full screen. That's kind of the drawback there.
Yeah, there's a mode in X Wayland specifically for doing that called rootless mode, where you can you could theoretically just not do anything and just run it on top of Wayland like that. Obviously, it's not intended. You're basically at that point using you're using a regular desktop as a bootloader for your desktop, which is then just running additional desktops for the sake of it. But it is like it is a stopgap there you could do if you really wanted to.
I think there's some possibility there though, because there are window manager-less compositors like I think it's called Cage.
Yes, yes.
It's intended for kiosks. I'm not sure that it would really work entirely for a full window manager yet, but somebody could take that and run with it and possibly make a full-size X Wayland based off of that.
Well, yeah, there's that, but also there's from Valve they have GameScope, the thing they use for making, games run a bit better, dealing with things like having scaling and forcing anti-aliasing, things like that. Like that, the GameScope is a Wayland compositor as well. It's a very, very lightweight one, but it's basically the same concept as Cage, but just not intended for like kiosk usage.
Yeah, I heard a lot about Valve. I didn't know that that was actually a Wayland compositor, though. I didn't know if they'd made it that far yet, to be
Oh,
honest.
yeah, no, it's been like that for a long time. That's they've had it for a couple of years at this point.
I mean, I don't keep up much with gaming, to be honest, but
Fair
that's
enough.
pretty. What they're doing is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's understandable. That's understandable. You're way too busy trying to port KDE 1 over the past. How many years did you say you've been working on this?
So I started back in roughly 2016, I think. There's been a few years there in there where I've kind of let the project stifle. And I should also say I'm not the only person working on it. There's another guy who's done a lot of work. Keith, he actually did the bulk of the hard work of porting it,
Mm-hmm.
and great guy's done a lot of fantastic work. Without him, this wouldn't happen. It's been a great learning experience for me, but there are some technical aspects of understanding code written in the 90s versus now that just takes that experience, and he has that, and it's been great to have it help.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's yeah. I actually want to kind of know about that. What are some of the oddities about '90s code then? Because I know that obviously the way people develop code, the way people manage code, the way people just source control massively changed over these years. But I assume the way people write the code as well also probably has changed.
To some extent, yes. The biggest changes in the case of like what I'm doing is C++ standards. I think it probably was originally like C++ 98.
Mm-hmm.
And, now we're targeting C++ 11.
Mm-hmm.
And, but as far as, the general code, I don't think much has changed, really, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
The well-written code back then, which Qt and KDE were, only worked today because of how good of a job they did back then. The code is formatted well, it is commented well, it is pretty clean.
Mm-hmm.
So if you wrote good code back in the 90s, it probably still work today.
Well, there's a lot of X11 applications which you can find on places like the AUR where they haven't had an update in 15, 20 years, and it's usually going to be fine. That is one of the nice things about Xorg, where because it hasn't changed in so long, because we haven't had these new protocols brought in or protocols removed, a lot of really old software just works exactly the same way that it did back when it was first written.
It does, and that's one of the things I think a lot of people miss, in the Xorg to Wayland transition is that backwards compatibility. When reviving all of this, up until we were trying to fix the keyboard,
Mm-hmm.
there was not one error or like a compiler error, no bugs that have been caused by the X11 libraries. It literally just worked
Mm-hmm.
out of the box with no changes.
Well, that makes things a lot easier. That definitely makes things a lot easier. Because you're going to have your hands full dealing with the stuff that you know is not there, having unexpected things, right? Because you said, like, desktop files also weren't a thing with that version of KDE as well. When did desktop files even become a thing? I don't even know.
I don't know, but I did some digging into that, and KDE 1 uses these things called KDE Link. And if you
Okay.
open a KDE Link file, it looks suspiciously like a modern desktop file.
Uh-huh.
So I don't think I need to, verify how much difference there is, but it looks like that. The basic idea for that goes a long ways back.
Well, yeah, a lot of stuff that Free Desktop did early on was kind of... There were unofficial standards, like the XDG desktop entries, where you have your like your download file at the home/download. You have your documents at home/documents, music, home/music. Like, this is stuff that people were already doing. A lot of the stuff was just a formalization of those ideas.
Yeah, the free desktop specs actually been pretty good for helping that. And I don't know if you've seen, they're actually kind of in a little bit of a tizzy with their servers trying to
Yeah, I
move
just
all
put a
of
video
that.
out about that today. Yeah. Yeah, they
So I hope they can find another provider, but it just amazes me how much resources that they have put forward to doing that.
Well, I have been told that their servers are considerably more expensive than they need to be. They probably could host everything on much cheaper servers with a better layout of their infrastructure. But if someone's sponsoring the hardware and they're throwing $20,000 of CPUs at you, you can kind of just like brute force stuff. You don't really
Yeah.
need to have a great structure.
That's one of the things about a lot of these projects is, even like me, I have a server. All my stuff is hosted on my own server, which is just in the other room. And there's only so much time, we have to sit, and manage GitLab and, all the stuff behind that. And so we end up with, a lot of unoptimized setups because of that. So the time split between maintaining infrastructure and code has to, be balanced. But I think they could probably move to another data center and improve it quite a bit, though.
Yeah, they've been talking about wanting to move to Hetzner, I believe. And they've gotten quotes for it, even using the same layout they have. It's going to be like $10,000 cheaper than it was before, which, yeah, it definitely is a nice improvement, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think Hetzner's a good option to consider. I've used them. They've got pretty good hardware, pretty good support, so that would be a great thing to see there.
But this isn't the first time they've had a problem anyway. Back in 2020, they were on Google Cloud, and Google Cloud was sponsoring them back then as well, and then they stopped doing the open source credits program, and suddenly they had to pay the entirety of the Google Cloud bill. And then they moved to Equinix, and they now have the same problem again. So, like, this is a thing that happens every couple of years. They've dealt with it before. It's probably a good idea to have a contingency plan in place, so if it does happen again, they don't suddenly have to, like, come up with an idea of what to do. But I have no doubt that they can deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they've got a lot of great people in the community to help them, but even still, any migration is just, it's a really hard thing to do, to move that much data over.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people sponsored, like they said, Equinix has provided them servers for, so many years. And that's a great thing that they've done that.
I believe it's not just affecting free desktop. Alpine Linux also was on Equinix Metal as well, and they now have to move somewhere else. And I'm sure there are a bunch of other projects that were also using Equinix Metal, whether they were sponsored or whether they were doing it themselves. Anytime you have a server provider shut down, you're gonna have a lot of people that are working overtime.
If I'm not mistaken, I think FlatHub has some other stuff on Equinix as well.
I haven't seen any of the FlatHub people mention it, but if free desktop's on it, I wouldn't be surprised if some of FlatHub's on it.
Yeah, I could be wrong on that, but I believe some of their stuff is on there.
Wait, yeah, no, no, you are right. Yeah, 4 days ago, one of them mentioned, yeah, the Equinix Metal has been one of their sponsors as well, so they also have to move. Is it? I don't think it's the store itself. It looks like it's their build pipeline. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, annoying. As I said, anything like this is going to be really annoying to deal with, and I have no doubt that these projects can find something new. And I know AWS was offering some open source credit program, so some of them might move to that. I know AWS has like a review process though, and that's kind of the reason why Free Desktop didn't want to go over there, because they didn't want to have to deal with like I think it's like a monthly review of whether the way you're using the credits is like sensible, if you're like trying to go over how much they're offering you, things like that. Either way, you know, hosting's important, but also hosting's expensive, especially if you're a big project.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's I think people don't realize just how big Free Desktop is and just how much is under the banner of Free Desktop. I've talked a bit about a short list of it, but pretty much every Linux user is using probably at least 2 or 3 things on Free Desktop.
Excuse me. Yeah, Free Desktop covers quite a bit. Everything from Xorg to Wayland. I believe things even deeper than that, like libinput,
Yep.
Mesa, I think are all on Free Desktop. So every Linux desktop user is depending on their services at some point.
Mm-hmm. Both Pulse Audio and Pipewire are also part of Free Desktop as well.
I don't think there's any love lost for Pulse Audio if it goes away.
I don't know, Pulse Audio is a weird one, right? I think a lot of the hate for Pulse Audio is kind of like the hate for KDE, where... Follow along with this. So, a lot of people think KDE is really buggy because they either remember KDE 4 or they've heard people talk about remembering KDE 4. And KDE 4, that was a development release released as a full release. Like that was entirely them screwing up. There was no reason that KDE 4 should have been called the 4.0 release. That was entirely a mistake. But Pulse Audio is in a similar way, where if you go back to the adoption of Pulse Audio, you will hear people like Lennart Pottering, who worked on Pulse Audio, saying Pulse Audio is the audio system that breaks your audio, because distros like Ubuntu were shipping it with completely broken configurations. Nobody knew what they were doing with Pulse Audio back then. It was a giant mess. So you have people that have been around since the start of Pulse Audio who've talked about it being really buggy. But like last time I used Pulse Audio, it was fine. It's just because it was buggy for so long and people... It's really easy to convince someone of something rather than change their mind. So once something becomes good, now you have an issue of how do you make them realize it's good?
It's really hard to kill, it's really hard to kill myths on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, it works pretty good these days. It definitely earned its reputation in the early days, but it works pretty well. I'm using it right now, and nobody would know the better.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, on the note of a Pipewire and Pulse Audio, that's another thing that would be part of the Wayland porting process. Dealing with the whole, like, desktop portals, Pipewire video capture stuff, that's a whole nother thing you're gonna have to learn about and how to deal with.
Yeah, so sound support in KDE 1 obviously existed, but it obviously doesn't work right now. It's pretty low priority to get sound working as far as KDE is concerned. Back in that day, OSS was actually one of the main audio servers.
I didn't even think of that.
Also, it was just a baby back then, so KDE 1 is probably was capable of using OSS at some point. But sound, screen capture, those are all really low on the list for now.
Sure.
I just want to be able to show a desktop, have working clipboard, those basic things, and then we can implement from there. But yeah, sound's come a long ways, and also works pretty good these days. OSS made a version 4 some years ago, and that's kind of died again.
Right, so I obviously it's from 1998, right? I'm just forgetting, like, if you put a list of things in front of me, I'm gonna realize like, yeah, okay, these are things that are not there. But like as you're going through this, I'm realizing there's more and more and more work that I didn't even consider that would have to be done here.
That's kind of the same thing I see. I go through and tally up what I probably have to go through, but you're basically touching every facet of the desktop in a transition like
Mhm.
this. Talking of legacy code, Qt2 still had support for Netscape plugins.
Okay,
That's
sure.
been removed, but uh, that was a thing back in the day.
I'm having a look at Ulsa right now. That released in '98, so it released the same year as KDE 1. Yeah. But it wasn't introduced into the kernel until 2002. So KDE 1 just didn't have support for Ulsa at all, if I'm correct here.
Not that I know of, not that I have seen.
Okay. That.
Actually, none of the sound components are working yet.
Mhm,
K Mixer, K, any of the K multimedia applications have not even been touched yet.
mhm,
All
mhm.
we have is just bass.
Right. Well, you mentioned being able to run Firefox. Does running a modern application on this desktop, obviously besides the audio stuff, that's a problem. But besides that, does it mostly just work? Do you have any issues there?
Apart, yeah, everything that works in X11 works on
Okay.
my DE.
Okay, so it's not
Sound
causing
actually
any
still works
additional issues.
too. Yeah, Pulse Audio doesn't depend on the desktop environment; it just has to be launched. So you
Right.
can play YouTube videos, but you have no volume control because there's no mixer.
Well, I guess you could use like the pulse mixer then. So you'd open your
Yeah,
terminal, run pulse mixer, do that, but the actual controls built into the desktop don't work.
yeah. There's no keyboard shortcuts when it's at 100%.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
everything works. As far as running any X11 app, you can run KDE 6 applications in my DE.
mhm.
And the first is true. You can run the old version of console on modern KDE.
What is a terminal? Something which most people don't really think of, but what what is old console like? You mentioned the whole not having proper Unicode support back then, which I obviously isn't a major issue for a terminal, but still a problem. How has console changed then?
The original terminal in KDE1 would have been what they called KVT or K Virtual Terminal, I
Okay.
believe is what it stood for. Console is more or less a copy of that at the time.
Sure.
There's some changes in the code, but as far as the user is concerned, it looks and acts identical as to KVT.
Mhm.
So nothing really thrilling going on there.
Well, considering that the way we do terminals is basically emulating systems from the 80s anyway, it should be fine.
You can do, most of the basic things. You can set, your color schema. So if you like a dark background and green text, you can do that.
Mhm, mhm. So the desktop is coming along, is a good way to put it.
It's step by step.
Mhm.
Uh, Gets better each day.
So what is your long-term plan for the desktop? If let's say, you just keep working on this, you keep progressing 5-10 years from now, whenever you, whenever you get bored with the project, what is the end goal you want to get it to?
I'd like to work out obviously all the bugs and as it sits.
Mhm.
My initially I don't really plan on making much changes, but long term I'd like to polish it up a little bit while still keeping the original aesthetics and not really change it. If we want a whole bunch of fancy features, we have modern KDE.
Sure.
It's aimed at somebody who wants minimalist, undistracting UI, or somebody who's running something old and wants to have a more featured desktop environment.
Mhm.
In the long run, I'd like to, offer some things like in KDE 1, you have your bottom toolbar is
Mhm,
your menu and your application launchers, but your actual Windows window taskbar is actually at the top of the screen.
mhm,
And I'd like to retain that option, but Corel, which is still a company, had their own Linux distribution back in the day, Corel Linux.
mhm, mhm,
And they kind of tried to make it more usable, for Windows users. And one of the things they did was they modified KDE 1 to have all that in the bottom taskbar like it is nowadays.
mhm.
And that was actually all open source. I have the source code for Corel's modification. So eventually I plan to integrate that so you can choose either the classic KDE 1 layout or you can have a more modern all at the bottom layout.
Mhm.
Uh, Also plan some updates to the file manager. Again, probably going to borrow from Corel's code where they did some improvements to KFM because it's really basic.
Mhm.
So some basic quality of life things like that, making so you get notifications. That doesn't exist in KDE 1. There's no notification area or dock per se.
Well, yeah, that I believe
Uh,
is, I believe the notification protocol is based off of what KDE did, like the one part that's part of Free Desktop. But I don't know when they first created that. Probably like KDE 2 or 3.
KDE 2, one of the big things came with KDE 2 was what they call a decomp.
Mhm,
That was the precursor. I'm not sure if dbus was based on it, but that was inter-process communication for the desktop,
mhm,
and that hung around all the way through KDE 3, and obviously Trinity still uses it, but we have dbus now, so
mhm,
we'll probably try to integrate that within some reason.
mhm, mhm. Okay, so basically you want to keep the desktop basically as traditional as possible whilst making it more usable on a modern system, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. I want it. I don't want to change a whole lot, but I want to have enough so it's comfortable to use.
Mhm. That's fair. That's fair. I can, I can respect that. I can respect projects that want to take an old version and then turn it into something new, like a Cinnamon, for example. But I think it is really cool that you just want to keep this old experience alive. Like that is really cool to me.
Yeah, it's there's many other options if we wanted to fluff up a desktop. There's so many other options. There's really no need to duplicate that
Sure.
work. There's Plasma. There's Gnome, like you said, Cinnamon. There's also LXQT is a great lightweight modern desktop environment.
Mhm. um Again, I had something. It's just it's gone. Um what was I going to say? Damn it. God damn it. Shit. I
Let's say it's Friday.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is Friday for me. Yeah. Um so okay. What this is a great episode. We've had multiple disconnects. I don't remember what I'm trying to say. Um yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's go into your history using Linux. You mentioned you used a lot of Red Hat 6, was it?
I misspoke when I said 6. Actually, I started on version 5.
5. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So was that your first version of Linux?
Actually, no.
Okay.
And not Linux, but I actually learned computers on PC DOS 7. I actually still have my original. These are the ones I learned on the exact discs. They
Oh
still work.
wow.
But so I learned on DOS, and then I went to Vector Linux, which I don't believe is around anymore.
I
Uh,
Wait,
it
I feel like I'm pretty good at the early history of Linux. I have never heard of this one.
it was a based on Slackware. supposed
Oh.
to make Slackware easier. Kind of a cool, nicely worded installer. So I learned on Vector, and it was just command line only at that time.
Mm-hmm.
2 floppy disks, and you were installed. From there, I learned Red Hat 5 and SUSE 6 was where I went to from there. And obviously, the internet wasn't really usable on those, and at some point, made the jump to newer SUSE and used Ubuntu and Debian. One distribution of note, which I'm really fond of, no longer around, was one called LibreNet.
LibreNet.
And
You've really tried out some ones that I don't know about.
LibreNet was before Ubuntu. LibreNet was kind of a flagship distribution, and it was called Debian on steroids.
Okay.
It was famous because they had a easy to use installer and this really cool tool called Admin Menu. And it was all graphical at that point, and that was something Linux really didn't have at the time, unless you went to like Mandrake or the likes. But as far as Debian was concerned, Debian was kind of a pain to install back then. So LibreNet wrapped the installer in something nicer. They came with a nice package set. I've actually got somewhere. I've got the original disc set. It was a 2-disc, 2 CD set, and I had everything you needed on it. And that's actually kind of where LibreNext came from.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. For anyone who's unaware, that is where's the tab? There it is. That is the domain that your lab's on. Yes.
Yes.
Probably should mention that. just mention like LibreNext. Like, what is the context for that? Yeah.
Yeah, and LibreNext has kind of been my side project for years. I've always wanted to kind of continue on LibreNet as a distribution. That's what that was supposed to be. Making a distribution is a lot of work, really hard. And so I've not really had anything to really show for it other than a couple of, small releases, but it's not really been the same thing as LibreNet. That was just as good as it got. Then Ubuntu came and there wasn't a need for it anymore. So I used Ubuntu probably up until Natty Narwhale. That one is very easy to remember because that's when they switched to Unity.
Oh.
And it was a disaster. And I haven't used Ubuntu since then, other than the occasional use for packaging. So, some other distributions I've used along the way: Peanut Linux, which I think became a Linux along the way and has since been discontinued. Obviously, I've used some of the major ones: OpenSUSE and Fedora. Used Red Hat in the production environment. I've also used, obviously, some of the BSDs and Open Solaris. So I like to dabble around.
I have had, what is this? 200 close to 260 episodes. A lot of them have been people that use Linux. There is maybe 2 people I've had on who've mentioned distros they've used in their history that I didn't know about. You are one of those people. I've never heard of Peanut Linux.
Yeah, it was, I forget what it was even based on. It was kind of its own thing, really.
Let's see. What is distro?
Kind of had a nice theme to it, and it just wasn't usable anymore by the end, though, because they were so far outdated. They didn't share a common tooling system, and kind of a shame to see it go. Used Lindos back in the day.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
There was Caldera Open Linux I used as well. The Linux Wizard was on that. There's probably more I've forgotten at this point.
You brought up Unity there. Unity's such a weird one because I can go back and find forum posts of people being so angry about Unity coming in and how Unity is ruining everything. And then I could find the exact same forum post a couple of years later about how GNOME is ruining everything and why are we leaving Unity?
I think the biggest disaster at the time was Unity built on Mir, which was supposed to be its own display server.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't support something as simple as Intel integrated graphics. I had a ThinkPad T23 that it wouldn't run on,
Right.
and quality control was kind of bad at the time too. But Unity is still a thing, but for mobile phones, actually.
Mer. Mer is still a thing, you mean? What do you mean? Wait.
Unity is still a thing. I
Uh,
think it's called Unity 8 now, I think is what it's called, but it's designed for mobile phones.
well, there is a developer who's taken over the Unity desktop as well. There is a Unity spin of Ubuntu now, or Unity flavor. Um, oh, wait, do you mean... Ah, yes, yes, yes. Okay, it's going by Lemiri now. That's why I was confused.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Lemiri is the one on mobile, and then there is somebody else who has taken over the Unity desktop, who is basically trying to do what you're doing. Bring it, like, turn this desktop into a modern desktop, keep it going, because that was the first version of Linux that he used, so he just kept it going. He's like, hey, I like Unity, I'm gonna keep doing this thing. It seems like whether people liked Unity or hated it, it depends on whether you started on it. Because the people
I don't
that...
think the idea was bad. I mean, from what I remember, it's not much different than GNOME 3.
If you put them side by side, especially the way that Ubuntu configured it, they're very, very similar looking. I like the idea they had back then. So the whole thing they were trying to do is this idea of convergence, where they wanted to build a GUI that could be used across every device they had. Because at the time, Canonical had this idea where they were gonna make phones, they were gonna make TVs, they were gonna make tablets, and they had demos for all of this stuff. They actually had one of the most popular... Was it Kickstarter, or was it one of the other websites? Canonical, you probably remember this. Canonical tried to fund the development of a phone.
I don't remember that, actually.
Okay, there was a phone called the Ubuntu Edge. They raised $32 million in 1 month.
Wow.
Yeah, it was... I think it was either the most or one of the most successful Indiegogo campaigns at the time. It was really... I'm surprised you didn't hear about it. Maybe you're too busy doing things that actually mattered.
I was pretty checked out of Ubuntu and Canonical at the time, to
Yeah,
be
fair
honest.
enough. Fair enough. Yeah, the Ubuntu, like, the other thing with the Edge, the reason why it did so well, they were off, like, the specs they had on this thing just didn't... Oh, sorry, they had a goal of 32 million. They didn't reach the goal, right? That's what it was. Okay. So this thing, they were the specs they had on it just didn't make any sense for a phone at the time. So this was during the time the Galaxy S4 had storage of 16 gig. The iPhone 5 had 64 gigs. They said they were going to have 128 gigs of storage. They said they're going to have twice as much RAM. And they're also going to do it like $200 cheaper.
I do wish we had more phone choices these days. Whether you're Android or iPhone, iPhone, there's no choice. I mean, you just choose from one of the same three models.
Did I disconnect again? What in the world is... Oh my lord. Oh my god, what is happening? One of these days! Discord! Why are you like this? Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. How long till I reconnect? How long till we connect?
Are you back there?
There we go.
There we go.
Hi. You were saying, iPhones, you have 3 choices, and then, I guess Apple must have DDoSed you. Or DDoSed me.
There's basically 3 models of iPhone to choose from, but Android you can choose from one of the 3 basically same brands nowadays. And I wish there was more choice. Not necessarily even Android, although that'd be nice because back in the day we used to have flagships from half a dozen different Android brands, and you just don't really have that much choice anymore these days.
Yeah, I remember, like, during, it was probably like 10 or so years ago, you would see a lot of companies sort of, like, leapfrogging over each other and doing a lot of really cool stuff. Like, I know LG used to have some really high-end phones as well. Motorola, when they were independent as well, used to do a lot of really cool stuff. Actually, speaking of different phones, I actually have this right here is a Linux phone. This is fun. It's running a modified version of Droidion and Phosh, which is built off of the GNOME stack.
Huh. There are a few alternatives. There's like OnePlus phones. And a lot of people, don't realize that you could run Linux on an Android phone with some work. One of my past projects for fun, I had a Debian Crute on a would have been an HTC. Oh, what was the model? Evo 3D, and had an X server running on as an Android app, and then would launch the Debian Crute, and you could have Trinity desktop environment on your Android phone.
That is cool.
So that was kind of a fun experiment there, but it wasn't really designed for the phone.
Right. No, definitely not Trinity. But like this, so this is my main phone. This was sent to me to like demo. My actual phone is it's like a $200 phone from Oppo. I'm not really much of a phone guy. I think like I try to minimize the amount I use my phone. I know there's a lot of people out there who like to spend a lot of time, customizing their phone. A lot of people like to jailbreak stuff and then, do whatever random stuff they do with it. It's a phone to me. It's cool, right? But like, I run Arch. I have my Arch system to deal with. I'll focus on that.
The phones are a great tool. A lot of us started flip phones, but by day I work in agriculture and your operating equipment. The phone is so handy nowadays. All my manuals are on the phone. Google's right there at your fingertips. And it amazes me how much $1,000 phone differs from one to the other when you actually put it to the test of the elements. I've had iPhones. I've currently got a Samsung. And I've had Google phones. And, they all work at the end of the day. They're just a tool to get the job done.
But one of them might break a little bit quicker.
Well, if you had a Samsung Note, I mean, it's a hand grenade, a really handy hand grenade.
I don't think they're ever gonna have people forget about the battery issues those phones had.
And that's not the first exploding thing they made. They made exploding washing machines at one point too.
I don't know if I've ever heard about that one. Samsung, wait, what? Washing machine. Wait, what is this? Wait, this what? I'm seeing like 10 different stories over multiple different years. So, recalls 2.8 million washing machines after reports of explosions. That's 2016. Then there's a different one in 2023. Then there's another one where they had to recall some... Oh my... What? Okay, sure. Maybe they shouldn't make washing machines. I don't know.
And no, you never think of something like a washing machine explode, but I guess they figured out how to do it.
Well, yeah, it is basically you've got like an engine in there rotating a big barrel. So if that barrel loosens, you're gonna have some problems. Sure. Okay. Well, that's I learned something new today. I learned about Peanut Linux and I learned about exploding washing machines from Samsung. Not exactly what I planned to learn about, but hey, I'll take it. Why not? Oh. So before you mentioned you have a bunch of retro systems as well. Um, what do you actually have? What do you have sitting around?
Uh, Half my collection's kind of buried, but probably one of the most easy to get things
Hmm.
is this. See if I can get it.
Okay.
This is a dual slot one board. So slot one, currently I've got two Pentium 3s on here. And the processors are actually a slot card instead of a socket.
Aha.
And this board originally had Pentium 2s on it, which I have Pentium 2 slot card. That's kind of my most prized one.
That is real cool.
It works. I have Debian 12 on it, or it did when it was all plugged in. But yeah,
Hmm.
it still works.
Okay.
It's kind of high end at the time. 2 gigabytes of RAM is what it maxes out at.
What year would that be from?
Uh, I'd like to say 98. It's a Intel board, uh, L440GX Plus, I think.
Yeah, 2 gigs of
And
RAM for 98 would definitely be pretty. You're doing pretty well for yourself.
yeah,
Probably
and
have no money left, but
I have no idea what it originally retailed for. It's probably way more than I could ever afford.
Mhm.
I've got a PC somewhere with an original Pentium 66, so pre MMX. And I've got my ThinkPad collection. My oldest one is a 770Z. That's kind of
Oh
my prized one.
wow.
Uh, I still want to add a 760 XL because that was my first laptop. That's where I was running DOS and SUSE and Red
Mhm,
Hat on. I
mhm.
still want one of those, but the 770Z, uh, pretty cool unit. Uh, you can still use it to some extent. I mean, you can install Debian on it, get on Wi-Fi and things like that. But it's old.
You could use it as a weapon as well. It is a pretty
You
pretty big
could,
one.
yeah, that would knock somebody out. I think the newest ones I have in my retro collection are probably like an IBM Net Vista with the Pentium 4.
Mhm, mhm.
I have another one actually. It's a server board. It's a Pentium 4 32-bit. So this is before they changed.
Mhm.
And it supports it's either 32 or 64 gigabytes of RAM.
Mhm.
So the boards has PAE support, which was really hard to find at the time. So that's another cool one I have.
That is really all of that stuff's real cool. I I don't know. I don't do the retro collecting stuff myself, but I can certainly appreciate a retro collection. Like there's a lot of stuff that I had when I was younger that I kind of wish I kept around. Obviously, nothing as old as like the 770Z, but I kind of wish I kept around like my old game consoles, things like that, my old game collection. Because I know you said you don't pay too much attention to games, but if you go look at like video game retro pricing, it's stupid because that space has turned into basically speculators all just fighting over how much everything is worth. What do you have here? What is this?
This is IBM. This is how IBM used to ship their software and manuals. It's an IBM, I believe it is DOS 3. And it's a whole guide. And I still have the original 5.5 inch floppies
Oh
with it.
wow, that is really cool.
I don't think I have anything old enough to run it though. And I've got in the same set, I've got a basic and basic compiler, which I didn't even know the basic compiler existed.
I think the only actually, well, I do have one cool thing that you might appreciate. Actually, two cool things. Give me a sec. They're nowhere near as cool as that, but it's still something I like to show people when I get a chance to. So this is the Complete Idiot's Guide to Windows ME. And I also have the Complete Idiot's Guide to Linux as well. This originally came with Caldera Open Linux 1.3.
I really like that. That was such a cool thing to use. Speaking of old Linux,
yeah,
Norton Antivirus.
I'm aware. Yes.
Was originally written by, I believe his name was Peter Norton. Sure. He actually wrote a really good book on Linux back in the day. It was kind of funny because, they always thought Norton Antivirus, anti-Linux, and he wrote a really good guide on Linux.
Do you know what the book was called?
Oh, boy.
Is it Peter Norton's
Complete Guide to Linux? Yep, that was it.
I might have to see if I can find a copy of that. That's kind of funny. You can still buy. Actually, you can buy a copy. I don't want to pay $65 for it. No, I'm not going to do that.
It's crazy what people ask for some of this old stuff. I've got my old Red Hat book, and people are selling them, for $100 and plus, sealed or whatever.
Jeez. Oh wait, here's one for $24. Oh, I might do that. That might be worth it.
Or the never forget Windows 2000.
Hey, nice.
It's something they don't do anymore, which is these just absolutely beautiful holographic discs.
I miss that.
I mean, it doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, I remember. I think there were a couple of games that were printed like that as well. Those are always really cool to see. As much as I appreciate how convenient it is to get software now, so when I was a teenager, that was sort of like the tail end of physical media. Like that was towards the end. Like that was when like a lot of CD stores were shutting down, DVD places were shutting down. 'Cause I remember when I was a kid, I was kind of born at like the perfect end point of all of this. I think by the time I was a teenager, that's when like Blockbusters and stuff were shutting down. So I got to experience that, which is something that a lot of people just have no idea about anymore. And it's nice to be able to just go online and 5 minutes later you have a distro, or 5 minutes later you have a video to watch. But I don't know, there's something that I do miss about going to a store like that, going and like having to pick something out, and I don't know, there's something to the inconvenience.
It was nice to see the effort put into those box sets. You get a nice box, that was put together nicely with the short manual. There's something about that you don't get with, digitally downloaded software these days.
Yeah, definitely. And I know one of the kind of, I don't know, going back to what I was saying about video games, I remember when you would see these like really, really nicely printed manuals where it's just full of like concept art that they use for it, and it's like little notes from the developers, and it's the same way with any like software package as well. You have like, hey, here's some like random quote from someone, here's like some early development screenshots. Like now if you're gonna have a long manual, it's just gonna be like it's long because there's 5 pages and then like 70 extra pages of different languages. I don't know, I would like to collect some old stuff, but again, going back to the whole speculator thing, there's a lot of areas where people just like to trade around these old items as a way to make money, so they end up just getting massively inflated in value.
Yeah, retro computing seems to have gained a lot of popularity, and the price of some of that stuff has gone up quite a bit.
Yeah.
Of course, the price of modern stuff's gone up. You look at like the latest NVIDIA cards.
Yeah, what is... I've not even looked at the 5090 price. I don't even want to know.
What I've seen is some they've got these scalper bots running around. I've seen some eBay listings where they're selling a cardboard printout of the card. And, it says that's what you're going to receive. But, the scalpers are just seeing 5090 within that price range, and they're buying these cardboard cutouts.
Yeah, I did see someone who was like, I promise to give you the card after it comes out, or something stupid like that. Like, what? I don't know why people rush to buy the new GPU straight away anyway, because that's when you're gonna have driver issues. Just let everyone else beta test it for you.
I'm still running a Quadro P400. It does the job.
Speaking of GPU prices, I remember when the Titan was first announced, and all of the tech YouTubers were freaking out about how this was $1,000 GPU. How no one's gonna buy $1,000 GPU. That's crazy. And now it's not even the top end card that's $1,000 card.
Now, I like Intel is branching into that market again, though, because I think that they're going to make better and better cards, and they're, actually affordable.
Yeah, Intel's in a weird spot. I'm kind of curious to see what they do with the next generation cards, because AMD, as much as I like AMD, they kind of are left alone in the mid-tier space. Nvidia's more than happy to, make some $2,000 cards that aren't made for gamers, but they're made for, compute AI stuff, and they have no competition there. And then on the mid-range, they kind of compete in the mid-range, but oftentimes AMD is a better value in the mid-range. But when someone is the only option there, you can be very lazy with what you do. And this is what happened with Intel back in the early 2000s as well with their CPUs, where before Ryzen came out, Intel, it was like, 5% improvement, 5 watts less used in this generation. It's like, why are you releasing this? But AMD was so far behind that they could do whatever they wanted.
I remember I got a laptop new, an HP laptop with a AMD Phenom 2. And I used it to do audio processing in Audacity, which is really not that intensive of a task, you would think. And it took forever. And one day I didn't have it, and so I had to go back to my old ThinkPad T23 with a Pentium 3, and it took a fraction of the time. I mean, that's how terribly behind AMD was, and now I've got Ryzen system, and it's pretty amazing.
And then Intel nowadays, they had I don't remember what was it. I don't remember what generations it were that were the CPUs were just killing themselves. They were just completely unusable. Was it 13, 14, something like that?
I think it affected some 13s and a lot of 14s.
Yeah.
They say they have it fixed. I guess we'll see.
Well, my understanding is they have a firmware patch, but with the damage that's been done, it's not going to address the damage. So...
Yeah, you can't fix burned out silicon, unfortunately.
So if you experienced issues with those CPUs, it will mitigate further damage, but if enough damage has been done, you basically are kind of screwed.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame to see that happen because, I mean, as long as they've been at it, I don't understand how they could have let that through.
Well, you say that, but then Nvidia was releasing GPUs that were lighting on fire because their new connector type just, I don't know what they were thinking with it.
Yeah, I always think about that because I work in automotive electric, 12, 24 volt DC, which as your graphics cards take 12 volts, or in that range. And I can never understand why they've not come out with a newer connector, because you see in the automotive area where they have connectors that are big, pins like that, and they can't handle large amounts of power. So I'm surprised to see these new NVIDIA cards come out with a connector that hasn't been modernized in decades.
Some engineers doing something. I don't. I'm not an. I'm not an electrical guy. I cannot explain it.
Yeah, I think it was more the name of standards, compatibility, because they introduced a new connector, and that'll be a big to do in the world because now everybody's got to buy adapters or new PSUs, but as much power as those cards consume, that's a problem if they go up in flames.
Yeah. Definitely don't want that to happen. And I remember there was like a big drama about whether it was like third-party cables that were the issue, or people not seating their cables correctly, or what it was, and I don't know. It was just a big mess. And I don't know. Like, the GPU space is so because of you had the whole crypto boom, and now you have the AI boom. GPU prices are never coming down. GPUs are never going to be cheap again. There was like a brief period in that period between the crypto boom and the AI boom where they came down a bit, but yeah, it's not happening again. They're gone.
Yeah. And I think that's where like Intel can come in if they keep up their progress. They can kind of swoop in and maybe pick up some of the share from NVIDIA. I don't know.
Very possible. I would like there to be more competition there, because I remember the first generation cards were actually pretty cool. They were one of the few cards that had, for me, kind of important, having AV1 encoding, which AMD didn't have, I believe, until their current generation. But to be fair, Twitch doesn't support AV1, so I can't even stream with it anyway. I could record videos and upload them to YouTube. But that was like the main thing I cared about. I know there's also this push for as a lot like game related, like AI frame generation and stuff like that. I don't know. I've considered buying an NVIDIA GPU because CUDA is really cool, and I would like to mess around with some of this like AI stuff. But I don't want to buy a new car and stick it in my computer.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. The cost of kind of puts me off when mine just continues to work.
Yeah, if it works, it works. I have been meaning to upgrade my system at some point because I'm running a well, my GPU's fine, but I'm on a Ryzen 3600X right now, and I'm kind of considering upgrading. I don't know. It again, just money. It all comes down to, do I want to spend the money?
Yeah, I've got a Ryzen 5 1600.
Hey, if it works, it works.
It works pretyougood. I think next one I'm going to go for an Epic system.
That's enough. Okay, sure.
When you're doing software development, the faster I can make the build times, the faster I can see if something is fixed. The Ryzen's pretty good, but in terms of building something every second that you can shave off and build time helps. So that's it's not good for gaming. I don't do much gaming, but for software development, that'll help out quite a lot.
Yeah. What is the build time on Osiris and on KDE 1? Like,
it's a couple minutes on the Ryzen system.
Okay. How long would it have taken on like the early systems they built it on then?
I don't know because I haven't compiled it then, but I do remember compiling the Linux kernel 2.2 on a Pentium 133 processor. Took all night.
Yeah. I have a friend who, so there was an official release of Linux for the PS2, and he decided he wanted to install Linux on the PS2, and yeah, it takes a little bit of time to compile on that system.
It's nicely about virtual machines now, because I build packages of Osiris, for multiple architectures, I could do it on from my old 32-bit machines, but
Hmm.
I could just spin up a VM and it's just as fast,
Hmm. Hmm.
but it still works pretty well that way.
Hmm. Yeah, that is nice. That definitely makes things a lot easier. Um, I think we've pretty much hit on most of the things I want to hit on, actually. I don't think there's much else I wanted to talk about. We kind of just, like, went down some random tangent for a while, talking about, whatever. Um, is there anything else you wanted to bring up that we hadn't really touched on yet?
I don't think so.
Um... Oh, actually, sorry. One last thing we didn't actually talk about was I know there was a discussion when it came to the whole Wayland thing. I don't know how this didn't come up during that discussion. Have you looked at whether you're gonna go down like a if you are gonna build your own compositor, whether you're gonna go down like a Mer or WL Roots route, maybe do something with Smithy? Any idea there at all, or not really thought about
Some of that I have to be careful of licensing,
that? Sure.
because pretty much everything we're working with is GPL v2 only.
Hmm.
Uh, in the case of Osiris, it is GPL v2 only.
Hmm.
Uh, it was brought to my attention. I mistakenly thought Mer was just GPL v3, but that had changed since the webpage I was on. So Mer is an option.
Hmm.
WL Roots is another viable one. It's MIT licensed. Uh, no Rust. Your Rust is a good language. I mean, it's necessary to have that, but I don't know if you've seen the latest discussion on the Linux kernel mailing
Oh, I'm well
list.
aware. Do not worry, I'm well aware of that. People send me links to a lot of things.
Yeah, all the societal politeness aside from that was missing. The point still stands that maintaining a multi-language code base is hard. You think of how big the Linux kernel is. This is a small project compared to that.
Sure.
Uh, Probably won't include Rust at any point or
Hmm.
bindings of any kind. I do plan to bring Python bindings for Osiris out at some point, though.
Hmm.
Just be nice to have.
Why
But
the addition of
yeah,
that?
what's that?
Why the addition of Python?
Uh, Python's nice to prototype applications quickly in,
Sure. Fair
and
enough.
like Qt6 and Python's pretty easy to work with. It'd be nice to have something similar to write something quick, and then you can later rewrite it again.
Sure, sure. Fair enough. Okay, so you're thinking either Mer or W Roots, but you're not really sure which one yet.
Most likely one of those two. I have a hard time seeing it fitting in with another compositor, and maybe that'd be something to consider. But we'll probably use one of those two. WL Roots is implemented pretty well.
Hmm.
It's got most of the stuff there we need. It's documented well, so we'll probably start with something like that.
Hmm. Mer is cool, but right now a lot of this because there was that kind of like weird period where it was doing the whole it being its own thing and not being Wayland. There is a lot it needs to catch up on, and there's some stuff that I know is not available in Mer. Like I don't think they have. I don't know if they have their desktop portal sorted out yet, and there's just like a bunch of other random things which WL Rooster just had for a long time. Even if it's not even if it hasn't got like a perfect implementation, it's had a lot more time to iron out some of those bugs.
I think WL Roots is probably a better choice just from the fact that it's more community driven than backed by a large corporation.
Hmm.
Uh, Being more favorably licensed is always a good thing. And like you said, they've had a lot of time to iron out a lot of the bugs. So
Hmm.
it makes a pretty easy choice there, really.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything then. So, if people want to follow the project, see where it's going, all that stuff, where can they find it?
So they can go to LibreNext.com,
Mhm.
and on the front page, I gotta even look at my own website. There's all my projects listed on the front page, and they can download Osiris. There's instructions for installing packages, and my IDE. There's just some basic information. You can compile it and run it,
Mhm.
but it's not straightforward. So I haven't really advertised that really. And eventually there'll be packages. Probably see it on Reddit, and but if people are interested, they can look there. We have a forum.
Mhm.
Uh, community.librenext.com. And for anybody else interested, we also have our GitLab interest if they want to contribute or file bug reports, things like that. Getting more eyes on it is always a nice thing to have.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, anything else you want to mention?
I don't think so.
Sweet. We'll do my outro and then we'll sign off. So, main channel is Brody Robertson. I do Linux videos there 6-ish days a week. I did a video about this project, and maybe at some point in the future when it's further along and there are packages and stuff, I might do a stream of it, mess around with it on there. We'll see. I've got the gaming channel, Brody on Games, where right now I'll be playing... I probably finished 9 Cells. I might be playing through Strange the Paradise and also Ender Magnolia, so check that out. I've got the React channel, Brody Robertson Reacts, which I upload clips to, and the podcast that you're listening to right now. This is Tech Over Tea on YouTube. You can find the audio release on basically every podcast platform. It's on Spotify. There is an RSS feed. Search Tech Over Tea and you will find it. I'll give you the final word. What do you want to say? How do you want to sign us off?
Well, I mean, thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you for bringing awareness to the project. That was really cool to see. To anybody listening, these projects are fun to play around with, and I encourage everybody to do something similar. It's a great learning experience.
Sweet. Yeah, that's a good message.